Record. Hi, I'm Shannon Powell. I'm joined today by Donnie Kahn of Indivisible Westchester, and we're so thrilled to have Chris Lu here. Chris is a former Obama administration official. Chris, thank you so much. We have a lot to talk about. We have 61 days before the election. Can you believe it?
Yeah, boy, this is going to go really fast, especially with early voting starting. Ballots are going to start getting mailed out to people. And so what I always tell people is, look, come up with your voting plan. If there's mail-in voting, figure out if you want to do that. If you have early in-person voting, think about that as well. We need to take everything into consideration. Obviously, the pandemic and people need to be safe, but you need to make sure your vote gets counted. So if you have a way to vote early, go ahead and vote early.
Let's talk a little bit about Biden. Now, just yesterday, the DHS was saying, well, we got reports that DHS actually had not passed along a report that the Russians, again, let's all not be shocked, are trying to interfere in the election and trying to spread misinformation about Biden's mental health. What do you know about Biden? You worked for the Obama administration. You know him well. Give us your take.
I've been fortunate to have known Joe Biden and worked with him, really for the entire Obama administration. In the first term, I managed President Obama's cabinet, and so I worked very closely with the vice president around the implementation of the Recovery Act. This was the big stimulus measure that we passed in February of 2009 to get the economy back up and running during the Great Recession. And I saw the way that Joe Biden work the phones, talking to governors and mayors to figure out what did they need in order to get jobs going back to their local regions. And then I saw him, on the phone or in person, twisting arms with members of the cabinet who were getting money out the door, really pushing them to get the money so we could fund projects, and get people back to work. And really, because of the vice president's work, it is one of the reasons why we averted the next Great Depression. I also saw the vice president in action during the H1N1 crisis. This was swine flu in 2009, as well as Ebola in 2014. And those were pandemics. And the reason we didn't have 180,000 people die during those pandemics and didn't have schools closed and sports leagues closed is because we had an organized response that was based on experience and leadership and science and facts. And so professionally, I could not be more happy to have Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee. But I would also just say personally, he is one of the most thoroughly decent people I have ever met. And decency, you would think, is, a prerequisite. But when you've been in politics as long as I have, you meet a lot of people who are accomplished, but may not be good people. Joe Biden is a good person through and through. He's empathetic, he's kind, he's generous. He is the one who is always reaching out to people who are down, who have had something happen to them. He's the one. He's a fantastic motivator of staff. He throws himself completely into the work that he does. And what's important is that it's not guided by what's in his best interest or what is politically the right thing to do, but is what the right thing to do is for Americans, and really what the right thing to do for American workers and the American middle class and those people who haven't gotten a fair shake in life. And that really just comes back to his upbringing in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and the lessons that his parents taught him. I mean, he is one of the most honorable people I have ever met, and it's hard to come up with a more clear contrast between anyone and Donald Trump.
The empathy, I have really missed seeing a sense of empathy from our leader, right? From leaders. And so that is the one thing that really came across during the convention, the Democratic convention, was just that, wow, we have somebody who actually cares about others and how important that is.
Every one of us who worked in the West Wing with the vice president have a story about when he pulled us aside when he saw that we were having a difficult period of time, or there was a family crisis that he had heard about in our lives, and really reached out and comforted us, often handing us his cell phone number, often writing us notes, and that just speaks volumes, because these are not moments that he did for press. He did them because they were the right thing to do. And, I was watching as we tape this today, the vice president is in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I was watching a little bit of his town hall, his listening session. And what's remarkable is having a presidential candidate sitting and listening to people talk and taking notes. He's not talking himself. He did make remarks at the end, but he really wanted to hear from other people. And boy, it would be so great to have a listener back in the White House again.
When you compare the person that and Joe Biden, you were part of the Obama-Biden transition team. Actually, you led it in 2008. And when you see the person and the way you talk about him and the stories that we hear about him, and then you think of, and Shannon led off with this ABC News report that came out yesterday, that the Department of Homeland Security blocked the intelligence report from coming out, that Russia was trying to question Joe Biden's mental stability. And then not only that's bad enough, but Trump himself is taking and sort of running with the Russian talking points. Having been inside the White House, how do you even process that you have a sitting president of the United States essentially mimicking and parroting Russian talking points to attack, by all accounts, a sincerely decent human being?
Yeah, let's do the Trump side first. This is a president from day one who has denigrated our U.S. intelligence agencies, who went to Helsinki in July of 2018 and stood there and sided with Vladimir Putin over U.S. intelligence agencies about election interference, and who has, basically put his political cronies in charge of these agencies and stifled information about what the real election threats are, and is now completely muddying the water about voting. And so that is troubling. What I am heartened by is that there are still professionals within these agencies that are pushing to get that information out. And I think it's important for voters to really be educated consumers of information. Again, whether you're on the left or right, and I suspect we're talking to mostly people on the left right now, look, don't just blindly follow whatever you read on social media. Certainly, just because somebody forwards you something or shares something on Facebook, don't take it with, do take it with a grain of salt and investigate it yourself. And I think this is the challenge we're living in right now, is that these social media companies are trying to police misinformation, and they're just so far behind where everyone else is. We've just seen over the weekend a series of manipulated videos that the Trump campaign and their allies are pushing out. And, Facebook, Twitter will label them manipulated, half a day later after they've already been spread. So look, that is certainly distressing, because it should be the case that regardless of what party you are a member of, you want our elections to be fair, but clearly that is not the approach this president is taking. I will tell you with regard to Joe Biden, I laugh when I hear these, this line that the Trump people are pushing about his mental fitness. Joe Biden is one of the smartest, sharpest people I have ever met. He knows, not only, names of governors and mayors and foreign leaders, he knows policy issues inside and out. He knows the history of how we came to these policy recommendations. And I think ironically, all that is happening right now is that Trump is so much lowering the expectation bar for Biden, that I think it's going to be sort of problematic when Biden does stand up in there in these public debates and shows that, look, he is incredibly well equipped with information. And I think all of this is ironic given the fact that we've seen a president who every single time that he opens his mouth says something that is, at best it's cringeworthy, and at other times it's completely dangerous.
Right. Speaking of landing a home run when it comes to Biden, he did such a great job. He did a great job today in Wisconsin, but he also did a great job at the Democratic convention. He really landed that speech. You talk about low expectations, but also talking about expectations when you look at the platform. You were a delegate, correct, Chris? I
am, yeah.
So I was a delegate as well. So, we had to vote on what the platform was, yeah. Right? So the Democratic platform was very detailed. The Republicans then came out with basically a non-platform. It is, I am going to be blindly loyal to Trump. How shocked are you by that? That's just such a change from the past.
Yeah, I mean, what it shows is that, again, the Democratic Party is the party of ideas. And again, whether it's, dealing with the pandemic, whether it's Build Back Better, whether it is healthcare, whatever it is, we have an idea, we have a plan, to quote Elizabeth Warren, for how to not only get our country back, but to improve it. And what you really see is the contrast with the Republican Party. I mean, this has become a cult of personality. This is all about Donald Trump. And I always say to my Republican friends, look, your party used to stand for lots of things, including things like fair trade, including humane immigration policies, including, fiscal responsibility, all these things that you have just thrown out the window during a time of Trump. And so, yeah, again, the contrast could not be more clear as when you look at those two-party platforms.
It was almost comical. It was the second term agenda that Trump put out after the convention. And, when you think of it, as you mentioned, the detailed Democratic platform, which is 92 pages long and essentially touches every important issue in our country right now. And then you have a one-page document that a 5-year-old could have written with a crayon that, teach American exceptionalism is one of them, or, get back to normal in 2021, which is like, I don't even understand how that is the presidential agenda moving forward. But, party platforms are one thing, but how important is it to have a clear vision for a country that's based in values for a president to have? I mean, when you talked about going to Kenosha, we saw what the GOP is doing, and they seem to have embraced this. Most presidential candidates would be embarrassed of this much division, this much violence in our streets. And they seem to have embraced that as a re-election strategy. I mean, what do you make of that as someone who has been in these circles?
And that's one of the things that I think I find so troubling about the way that Donald Trump has governed this country. And President Obama said it well in his Democratic convention address when he said, look, I didn't expect my successor to necessarily follow my policies, but I did expect him to try to rise up and occupy the office, to try to govern on behalf of all people in this country, not just those who supported him. And again, whether you are a Democrat or Republican, that is the way that presidents have traditionally governed. They've wanted to be the president of all of the United States of America. And now we have this constant division that Trump continues to push between the left and the right, red states, blue states, democratic cities, rural areas, white versus black. He thrives on division. And I think, Donna, you said it well, policies are important, but what are the values that you stand for? I want a president who believes in bringing people together, of the importance of diversity, inclusion, of trying to lift everyone up instead of just the people at the top. And that's, the president I served under, that's what he did, Barack Obama, and that's what his vice president, Joe Biden, stands for as well. And I think that's the stark difference in this country. And you've seen this play out over, as you point out, over the last couple of days where, you've got President Trump, who is trying to stoke the flames in Kenosha, who refuses to call out a 17-year-old supporter who crossed state lines with an AR-15 to shoot at people. And then the contrast is you've got Vice President Biden, who has said, look, I'm all for peaceful protesting, but there is no place for looting. There is no place for violence, no matter who is perpetrating the violence. And I think that's a very, as much as all the policy differences, and we can talk about healthcare or education or whatever, but just that simple differentiation of values, I think, is what is on the ballot in November.
Right. What about the media? I mean, as a former member of the media, I'm so distressed by the way the media has covered Trump.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a problem. I mean,
right?
Yeah, I mean, when is Trump just being a distraction, an intentional distraction? And when is he actually saying something that's dangerous? Mm-hmm. So I think about a couple of weeks ago where Trump, tweeted out that, we might have to delay the election. I mean, that was a startling thing that I think we could not ignore. the idea that, he might try to use whatever powers he thinks he has, which he doesn't. It's not his decision as to when the election is held. And I think it needs to be called out. Or when he, somehow leaves the door open that Kamala Harris, is not qualified, is not, constitutionally qualified to be president. I think we need to have to call him out. But it is hard, though, because there's this torrent of things that he throws out every single day. And it's like a game of whack-a-mole, and you don't want any of these things to sort of stick in the consciousness of people. But the problem is when you go down that rabbit hole, it drowns out all of the other conversation. It drowns out whatever positive coverage that Joe Biden can get, as well as the real policy, the really policy disputes that distinguish the two candidates.
Right. I mean, he really thrives by creating chaos. I mean, that's it. That's his MO, and that does make it hard for the Washington press corps to cover him. But at the same time, the framing of some of these things, you can't frame. You need to frame him in a way that really calls out, not gives more credence to his lies. So sometimes, there's this saying, you repeat lies enough times that they become the truth, right? And so I think that just by repeating what he says and saying it's not true is not working. And then it's also like apples and oranges. So there's some reports where, it's that he'll say something, and if you don't put it within the right context, then it gives it too much validity when it shouldn't be, because as you said, all he is trying to create chaos, and it's really not based in any kind of policy, or he's just doing it for his own good.
No, and I think it is incumbent upon the media. I mean, any media outlet that covers some of the crazy allegations that Trump makes, and then pivots and says, well, in contrast, Democrats have done some other bad thing, this kind of both sidesism, I think it's a problem. Right. I think what happens is the American people tune it out and say, well, this is the normal bickering that the two parties do, without recognizing that one of them is qualitatively far worse than anything else on the other side. Look, I mean, you've got to, we can have a whole, debate about COVID-19 and who's at fault here and what the right procedures are for reopening our economy, reopening schools. But when you've got a president who tweets out or retweets this weekend a conspiracy theory that only 6% of COVID cases are actual COVID deaths or real deaths, that's a problem. And the media has to cover that as this is a blatant lie. Otherwise, if you devolve into the kind of the both sidesism, it just confuses the American people.
Right. Exactly.
100%. I mean, I think some of it is, Chris, that, you're a son of immigrants and I'm an immigrant. I think our country, to some degree right now, is not used to seeing a president behave the way that Trump is behaving, so far out that it doesn't even compute. It takes, I think reporters are used to asking questions in a press conference or at the White House and expecting a presidential answer. And what they get back is so wacky. I had a reporter's quote that always stuck with me. I wish I could remember the reporter's name, was that trying to covering him in real time, it almost makes you feel like you're going crazy because it's hard to keep up with the madness that he's spewing at you. But to that degree, since you're in DC, and I know you have a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle, what do you make of you can expect, we knew who Donald Trump was before he took office. I mean, that's why some of us were so heartbroken on that fateful day. But what do you make of the Republicans who just refuse to hold him accountable? What do you make of the Lindsey Grahams and the Ted Cruz who are personally and viciously attacked, and yet they are just find themselves groveling at his feet at everything that he does? And there's legions of people like that on the right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, it's distressing. And, you can, when you hear them privately expressing their concerns about Trump, that's one thing. But unless you're willing to publicly say it, it's meaningless. And I think it's notable when you have literally hundreds of former Republican senior officials who have served in the Bush administration, or people that are members of Congress, or diplomats, all coming out and supporting Biden. I think that tells you a lot about where "quote unquote" mainstream Republicans, to the extent there are any, are right now. But it is distressing because our constitutional system really depends on three co-equal branches of government protecting their own jurisdiction. And sort of being in perpetual conflict with each other. But when you've got, in particular in a Republican Senate, not exercising their oversight powers, not taking seriously checks and balances, you've got people like Susan Collins who will acquit the president on impeachment and somehow then claim that he's learned a lesson from that. I mean, it's stunning. And I think there's going to be a reckoning once we get past this moment of Trump, which I believe in my heart of hearts sincerely will be on November 3rd, where people finally say, what was wrong with your party? Now, look, we're going to hear a lot of, oh yeah, I really did stand up behind the scenes and I pushed, whatever. Look, in this moment right now where our democracy is at stake, unless you're willing to stand up to this, in my mind, you've abetted all of the bad consequences and all of the bad behavior.
No, I agree. Can we talk about the economy quickly? You were the deputy labor secretary under Obama. I am still mystified that Trump gets he gets a lot of good press, not so much good press, but even he gets positive approval ratings on his handling of the economy. This is flabbergast me. I mean, I almost can't even spit out the question because it just irritates me so much. It's like, how can this be? How can we, yes, the stock market is doing great, but we have record unemployment. I mean, look at what COVID has done to our country from an economic standpoint, and people are still like, oh yeah, he's done a great job with the economy. How can this be? And what can Democrats do to try and reset the narrative, or actually make the case and make people understand that they are better for the economy?
Yeah, and so let's level set here. I mean, first of all, the stock market is not the economy. And so it doesn't matter where the stock market is. That's not where average people's lives are. Most people in this country, the overwhelming majority of people, have no equity interest in the stock market whatsoever. We know that during the time of Trump, income inequality has widened. The number of people without health insurance has increased after decreasing during the Obama administration. More people are going to food banks, and that was even before COVID. And obviously, when you add now COVID, you've got double-digit unemployment. You've got 29 million people as of today collecting unemployment benefits, and you've got millions of people facing eviction. Look, the economic recovery that Donald Trump takes credit for was started under President Obama in 2010 because of a lot of important work that was done by Joe Biden. Donald Trump has basically rode on that economic success. He's juiced the economy through $1.5 trillion of tax cuts, by and large, that went to corporations and wealthy Americans. And so this whole thing, like so many of Donald Trump's businesses, is one giant house of cards. And we've seen what happens. This thing has collapsed under the weight of this pandemic. And, what he wants people to believe is that we're going to get this V-shaped recovery, economic recovery. And the truth is, we never get that V-shaped economic recovery as long as you have 40,000 COVID cases a day, 1,000 people dying every day. And so, look, a lot of this is perception in terms of the polling numbers on his handling of the economy, but you're starting to see them even out a little bit, with, I think, Biden only now a couple points back in terms of the handling of the economy. And I think most people understand in this country, they are not better off under Donald Trump.
In some way, it almost feels, because you touched on this, Chris, is that his policies were already taking us down the wrong path before COVID hit. I mean, the trade wars and the tariffs and the bailouts to the farmers and the tax cuts, it seemed like we were going down the wrong way to begin with. I think COVID has just sped up, the darkness of the moment, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the statistic I used to come back to, and this was before COVID, was that 40% of Americans could not come up with $400 in an emergency. This was after $1.5 trillion of tax cuts, after the stock market hit record highs. 40% of people were essentially living paycheck to paycheck. And I think what COVID has exposed is all of the economic inequalities in our country. That, we have a federal minimum wage at $7.25 an hour that has not gone up now in 11 years. That we have the amount of home ownership in this country going down. We had a record amount of consumer debt, so auto debt, mortgages, student loan debt. If you want to talk about people who are hurting, there are people in their 20s who are sitting on massive amounts of student loan debt and who are now sitting through a recession that is not allowing them to work gainfully. So there were so many inequalities that were already happening, but it was easy for Trump to continue to pointing at his one benchmark, which was the stock market. And I think what we have seen now, when you have a pandemic, the impact of it has fallen disproportionately on low-income workers, on people of color, women. And I think that's part of one of the reasons why this whole, mirage of Trump's economic record is starting to dissipate now.
Right, suburban women understand that, and hopefully will come out in force for Biden. Here's a question for you. From the minute Trump was elected, felt that he was a very urgent threat to democracy. And it's interesting. I mean, I think some people thought I was a little crazy, but because that's literally what I thought and what I said to people. That's why I went to Washington and marched. I'm surprised by how many people I know personally who are now saying the same thing. It's almost like I feel like that collective thought is kind of sinking in, right? And so, how big of a threat to democracy do you think Trump is? Again, I'm shocked by the number of just average people who are like, wow, I'm worried about the future of our country and if our democracy is going to survive. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, Shannon. I mean, I think, we have these guardrails of democracy that have been badly damaged during the last 3.5 years. I don't think they survive another 4 years under Trump. It's so many things. Think about the way that he's launched this relentless attack on the media, calling them the enemy of the state. He's gone after the career civil servants in the federal government, calling them deep state. The way that he has given license to people to express their racism and their prejudices out loud. Look, there's always racism in this country. We're not going to get rid of that. But when you've got a president who is using that kind of hateful, divisive rhetoric, it gives license to everyone else to do the exact same thing. The way that he has really kind of branded people that don't agree with him as treasonous, the way that he has kind of launched this attack on, he's now on this whole crusade about low-income people invading, suburban areas, which is, we can have that conversation, which is not true. It's the policies are one thing, and look, he's clearly governing from a hard right perspective. But it's the rhetoric, it's the erosion of the norms, it's the way that he has politicized a Justice Department to do favors for his friends and to go after his enemies. And again, no matter what you think about George W. Bush or the first Bush, Ronald Reagan, these are not things that they did. Now, we have norms in place. The fact that Donald Trump is constantly on Twitter threatening investigations of companies, threatening boycotts of companies. I mean, so for anyone who tells me he is pro-business, I say to you, like, look, if you get on the wrong side of Donald Trump, he's gonna point his Twitter feed right at you. That is no environment for a business executive to try to operate.
One of the things, Chris, you mentioned, our democracy being at stake, and one of the bedrocks, obviously, is voting. And one of the many things that just makes you wonder what is even going on is just in the last few days, Trump has been trying to undermine the voting process. Yesterday, he told his supporters to do the mail-in voting and vote in person, because if their system is so good, as if, who's president right now? But what we all understand that voting is the key, right? Everybody has to get out and vote, and we have to get people we know to get out and vote. And I'm certainly going to be out there, and everybody in Invisible Westchester and all of our sister groups in Westchester will be out there doing that. What are we doing? And do you know of what we're doing? I know Eric Holder has an organization, Stacey Abrams has an organization. I heard Tom Perez the other day saying that the Democratic Party is working with those organizations to ensure that our votes are counted and that they matter. Do you know what some of the safeguards are in place right now to ensure that every vote is counted, and that if we make it to the polling station or if we get a mail-in ballot in, that it will be counted?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, first of all, we need to recognize that voting in this country happens at the local level. So it's operated by 50 state election officials. Some are good, some are not that good. And, we don't spend enough time, frankly, on our election infrastructure and on having clear rules. And you end up with these, goofy situations like we all remember in 2000 in Florida. So recognize that we have not come up with clear, consistent rules across the board in all 50 states. That's a problem. Recognizing that we're relying on infrastructure and have not put enough money into protecting it from foreign interference is a problem. And because you have 50 state laws, you basically have this, essentially 50 states of litigation that are happening right now. On the Democratic side, some of the groups you just mentioned are actively in court pushing back against Republican efforts to try to restrict voting and trying to push for greater access, more early voting locations, trying to at least push that, hey, if you get your ballot postmarked by November 3rd, election day, it can be counted even if it doesn't show up, until a couple of days later. And so look, these are all, I should say, I don't want people to get discouraged and say, well, this thing is rigged and it doesn't matter. It absolutely does matter. And we have seen this play out. Every election that has been held since Donald Trump came into office, Democrats have come out in force. And I should say Democrats and independents and Republicans who are aligned with us have come out. And we saw this happen in 2017 when we flipped a Senate seat in Alabama, when we won back a governorship in Virginia. 2018, we had a historic, 43 seat gain in the House of Representatives, took back a lot of critical governorships in places like Michigan and Wisconsin that are going to be important to us as we try to protect our right to vote in 2020. And then obviously in 2019, in my state of Virginia, we took back the legislature for the first time in a long, long time, won a governor's race in Kentucky and Louisiana. So look, when we come out to vote, we win. There are more of us. We are more powerful. But I really say to people, figure out what your election plan is. If you're going to vote by mail, request it early. The minute you get it, send it back in. If there's a drop box option and you feel comfortable driving it to the drop box, do that. Most states, or many states like mine in Virginia, we have early voting that goes 45 days in advance. So anytime during that 45-day period, you can go and vote in person. Or if you're going to go vote in person, figure out what your plan is. Have a plan. And then get all of your friends to tell you what their plan is as well. Because one of the things that we've always learned back when we were doing get out the vote canvassing work is that when people express their plan to somebody else, it's a higher likelihood that they'll actually follow through on that.
Right, Chris. We always try to get people to become as active as they can be on the local level. The importance of local elections. You mentioned flipping the Virginia House. There was it both seats of the legislature there in Virginia? Yes.
House and Senate. Yeah, we flipped them both.
Yes. How can you talk to us why that's so important for Democrats to act locally?
Yeah, I mean, I saw this in Virginia. I mean, we have had a spate of mass shootings in Virginia. The Virginia Tech shooting. We had one down in Virginia Beach as well. We could never get gun legislation through the Virginia legislature, even though we had a governor Democratic governor, because it was Republican controlled. We got gun legislation passed under unified Democratic control. We have more protections for the right to choose. We increased the minimum wage. We made voting easier in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So these are 4 tangible things that we did when Democrats have control at the state and local level. And I always say this, I mean, this is the problem with Democrats. We far too often just focus on federal races, and we don't really focus on state and local. And the truth is, for most people in this country, what happens at the state and local level has a much greater impact on their day-to-day lives. And if you're not happy with who's in Congress, well, part of the problem sometimes is that you've got state legislatures which gerrymander the congressional districts so that Democrats can never win enough seats in the House of Representatives. Or you've got really kind of crummy state laws, particularly on things like abortion, that are done by Republican legislatures for the sole purpose of trying to erode Roe versus Wade and get the Supreme Court to overrule that. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of the Democratic National Committee under Tom Perez is that Tom made the commitment that Democrats from now on were going to contest races from the school board to the Senate to the White House. And it wasn't just because of the policies that were being enacted at the state and local level. It's also because, you know what, today's school board member, today's state delegate is tomorrow's member of Congress, tomorrow's US Senator, tomorrow's president. It's a bench that we are building.
It's so important to build the bench. In closing, you mentioned make a voting plan. What else? What besides that do you think is the #1 thing people should be focusing on between now and Election Day?
Well, I mean, one other thing I think people ought to consider, I mean, look, there's many things. Obviously, make sure everyone in your family is registered to vote. Everyone in your immediate circle is registered to vote. You know, social media is going to be critically important. And look, there's a lot of disinformation. So if you see it, try to debunk it. Try to continue to push out positive messages about not only Joe Biden, but other Democratic candidates as well. One thing that I think will be very tricky for people that have college-age students is where they are going to vote. And again, we just have colleges going back right now. Some of them are virtual, some are going back in person, but are looking like they're going to close again. And it's unknowable as to where someone's college kid is going to be on November 3rd. So if they're registered in their college town, make sure they get an absentee ballot. If they're registered in, in your case in Westchester County, make sure they get their ballot. But again, there's so many people that are in so many different places right now. You really just got to think through where everyone is going to be and how they get their ballot and how they return it in time. And fortunately, notwithstanding all the Republican efforts to try to oppose more open voting, there are more ways to vote than ever before. Just don't make the mistake of waiting to the last minute to request a mail-in ballot and expecting that somehow they're going to be able to mail you a ballot and you're going to return it with, a week to spare. That's just not going to happen. Look, if you feel like you want to vote in person, and go early if that's an option. I am not a fan of waiting till Election Day to vote. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if it's going to be a torrential rain, snowstorm, pandemic, whatever it is. For me, I'm going to vote in person, and if I have to wear a hazmat suit to vote in person, I'm going to vote in person. I'm going to crawl over glass to vote in person. But most people are sometimes deterred by those things. So get your ballot in as early as possible.
Great. Any final thoughts?
That's great.
Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, and thank you for the important work that you all are doing.
Yes, have your hazmat suit ready. Everybody, that's add it to your shopping list. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can revisit this after a Biden victory. So
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Chris. Bye, Donnie. Take care.
Thank you so much, guys. Take care.
Guys.